Good morning from Jakarta, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining from other parts of the world. Welcome to the fourth series of Global Town Hall on transforming ideas into impact, how individuals and civil society groups can drive meaningful changes. I am Dianova, and I will be the master of ceremony for today's discussion. In addition to the annual flagship event, the Global Town Hall has now convened regular, smaller-scale discussions intended to create a platform for conversation among the civil societies. The theme of the discussions will range from geopolitics, climate, food security, technology, and many more. Please look forward to the upcoming Global Town Hall series. Today, I'm pleased to welcome over 200 registered participants to this discussion. We have attendees from more than 20 countries, to name but some but not all: Madagascar, Mali, the US, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Australia, UK, and many more, making this an actual Global Town Hall. Today's discussion will look into how individuals as well as civil society groups can initiate and enact changes that are not just impactful, but also long-lasting. We have the pleasure of welcoming Mick Sheldrick, author of From Ideas to Impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in a divided world, Chief Policy, Impact, and Government Affairs Officer and co-founder of Global Citizen, and Brianna Fruin, a climate activist. Welcome, Mick and Brianna. Before handing the discussion over to our moderator, I would like to inform everyone that we will be giving away 3 copies of Mick Sheldrick's book, From Ideas to Impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in a divided world, to the 3 people who ask questions at the end of the discussion. So please stay tuned until the end. And now, without further ado, allow me to hand over the discussion to our moderator, Dr. Dino Patijalal, founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. Pak Dino, you may have the screen.
Thank you, Dianova, and I want to welcome all our friends who are joining us from how many countries?
11 countries.
11 countries in this very important discussion on how to transform ideas into impact. I'm Dino Jalal. I'm founder of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. We're the largest grassroots foreign policy group in Southeast Asia and also in the Indo-Pacific. And we are also, along with Global Citizen, running what is called Global Town Hall. And this is the East-West, North-South discussion among civil societies across the world, across all political lines, to discuss common issues of shared interests. And I'm very glad that we have 2 of very active people from the grassroots who are speaking to us about how to make change from ideas. Yeah, and Michael Sheldrick, Mick Sheldrick, we call him a great man. I'm a lot older than him, but I'm an admirer of Mick. And Mick has just added 1 more member to the human race, baby girl named Mickey. So congratulations, Mick. And I don't admire how you will learn how to change diapers, which is part of your fatherhood, right? Something that I did not have much to do, right? And then Brianna, thank you for joining us from Samoa, beautiful, beautiful island country. And I look forward to hearing your experience being a climate warrior from a region that was actually the reason why we had the 1.5 degree target instead of 2, because in Copenhagen during the COP there, it was the group of island countries that insisted, look, if we don't go for 1.5, we're all going to drown. We're going to lose our country underwater, right? So thank you for setting a very high ambition for our climate future. Mick, let me start with you. You just published a book, From Ideas to Impact, a playbook for influencing and implementing change in the divided world. Can you give us a gist of the key points of your book, and also reflect on how you got to where you are? I'm sure you and me, we are like, we were both the geeky students, right? Who wanted to save the world and change the world, but somehow you found a way to be impactful, to translate those dreams, those aspirations into reality. So can you share with us 3-4 minutes on your reflections? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to the foreign policy community of Indonesia for hosting us today. And I want to give a big shout out to Brianna for also joining us. She's somewhere not far from me here in Melbourne. We're here on the eve of two big summits. One is the Global Citizen Now Summit, and there's also the ASEAN Australian Summit, because it marks 50 years since Australia-ASEAN relations. So there's a lot of world leaders, etc., in town, including from many of the countries represented on this call. But it's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you, everyone, for giving up time. In terms of the book, From Ideas to Impact, you know, one thing I was always conscious of at Global Citizen is, even though it's now a large platform, it has 12 million citizen advocates around the world getting action. I never taken action on the greatest issues of our time. I never wanted, you know, to send the message to people, whether they were university students, high school students, that in order to make a difference, you had to go out and found an organization. You know, there's many ways people can get involved in the big challenges of our time. And in the book, I argue that one of the best things we can do is to support policy change efforts. And why is that? Well, you know, first of all, I don't in any way diminish any of the individual actions that each of us can take. You know, we can register to vote. We can donate to incredible organizations who are doing great work at the grassroots. We can also use our time to have conversations. You know, in the US, only 8% of American households even talk about climate change in any given year. But one thing that doesn't come up a lot is the idea of getting involved in policy change. And, you know, from my perspective, that's a huge concern. And it's a huge concern on two levels. The first way it's a concern is the fact that if we look at the pandemic, for instance, you know, a few years ago, you know, we saw that even when people were in lockdown, no one could move. We saw that, you know, in terms of the impact that had on global emissions, it reduced it by 6 to 8%, right? And in some respects, that showcased the impact of our individual choices, but it also showed how much of global emissions is systemic, right? Because our transportation, our energy systems, our industrial processes, the way we make everything from steel and cement, all of that is powered by fossil fuels, right? Or other processes like deforestation, which is of course huge in Brazil and Indonesia. So in order to change that, we need to enact policies, right? It's policies that are going to change that. If you want to change systemic challenges, you need systemic solutions. But I'm also aware that when we talk about policy change, that can seem very abstract, and it can seem like that is something that belongs in the domain of governments alone. But the truth is our governments are not moving fast enough. We have a crisis of implementation. You can see that in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the UN 17-point plan to end extreme poverty and address climate change. Last year at the halfway mark, just 12% had been achieved. So my argument is that we need to turn to people, and whether that is cultural icons like Taylor Swift, whether that's businesses, or whether that's everyday citizens, we all need to get involved to address this crisis of implementation. And the book outlines 8 steps, 8 simple steps to give people a start. It doesn't have all the answers, but it does give people a way to get involved. And I'll finish up by, quoting, one of my favorite heroes, Eleanor Roosevelt, the former First Lady of the United States. She was talking in the context that individual actions on policy, if each of us start making a difference, start taking action, the impact that can have on our friends and circles in terms of motivating them to take action. And she said famously, and I have this quote up on my fridge as a magnet, she said, "The way to begin is to begin." and it starts with each of us.
Okay, thank you, Mick. Later on, I want to dig deeper into how do you get governments to listen, especially governments with different political systems who actually have a variety of sensitivities to public opinion. But I want to now talk to Brianna. And Brianna, you've made a name for yourself. You speak at the COP26. You mobilize the youth and the public in Samoa, in your community. What was your experience moving up that level from somebody who's just an ordinary citizen to an impact maker? Can you share with us? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think to really answer that question, I have to give context to the community in which I grew up in. So I grew up in a small island state where you don't really exist as one. It's not an individualistic society. So you exist as part of a village or part of a family. And so getting into climate work was more than just an individual choice for me, because I saw that the climate crisis was the biggest threat to my village. So it was the biggest threat to my community. And so it wasn't really something that I woke up one day and thought as an individual, I wanted to become an activist. I actually struggle with the word activist, because I think sometimes in the Western sense, activism's a choice. And I don't know if I really chose the path of climate justice. I feel like I just so happened to be born in the generation that really needed to do something. And so that's the context in which I first started my work in climate, in my work in climate work. And I think another important thing to mention about context of which I've started is legacy. So you've mentioned, Ambassador, that the Pacific Islands were really a strong voice in putting 1.5 on the table. And so I was really lucky that I started my climate journey around the time of the sealed deal around Copenhagen. I was also one of the youngest delegates for Pacific Island governments at COP21. So I was there and I watched the fight of my leaders pushing for 1.5, and it kind of springs back around to what Mick was saying, is how important policy is, how important language is. I know people see policy on paper is just black and white, but for me, seeing the Paris Agreement happen, 1.5, those two numbers and that one decimal meant the survival or the decimation of my islands. That was powerful. That text and policy was powerful for me. And so every step of the way, and I kind of see this woven back into what Mick was saying as well, is you don't have to be a founder of something to really be impactful. I've never founded anything in my life. I've started things, I've started chapters, and I've built upon books that people have written already, but I've really seen my journey as a support. So I've supported my village. That's why I took up this fight. I supported my Pacific government. That's why I advocate for being out in the media and saying things that I know that my government officials can't say. So if I need to be the one to call out governments on media because my ambassador can't, I'm happy to do that. So I see myself as someone that serves the village, that serves this movement. And that's how I've kind of made my way from a little girl planting trees to a teenager at COP21 to finally being a young adult who spoke at plenary by the time Scotland came around at COP26. So that's really been my journey in this space, and where I've seen myself be most impactful is really someone who serves the mission, and I haven't really necessarily been the one who started it.
Thank you, Brianna. And I think it's very significant that somebody told me that Samoa's population is 200,000 people, just short of that, or more, a little bit more than that. But the fact that Samoa and along with other Pacific Island countries can carry their weight and help the world to make a decision on 1.5 degree, I think that's quite incredible. And the fact that you came from a village in that small island country and that you were part of that decision, that's really gives us a lot of hope. Yeah. I want to go back to Mick. I think the question that, this is something that FPCI also face. The question of scaling up, Mick, you have an idea, right? And you talk to a friend and he likes your idea, and maybe, 20 or 30 people like it on your Facebook, right? But, Global Citizen has scaled up. You are in so many countries and millions of people following your movement and so on, right? So how do you scale up? There are hundreds of thousands of movements out there, and they're having a problem scaling up. There remain a 20 people movement or 50 people movement. Like FPCI, it took us 10 years to become the largest grassroots foreign policy group in the Indo-Pacific, right? How do you scale up? That's the big question. Yeah. Please, Mick.
Thanks, Ambassador. It's a great question. But I just before I address it, I was just really loving what Brianna was saying there and the story she told. And I think she really illustrated in very visual terms how policy, yes, it's all abstract, right? I instead of activist, I use the term policy entrepreneur because, policy entrepreneur says, yes, we have to engage in direct advocacy, but we also need non-traditional methods, right, to get people engaged. But someone told me, well, that can sound like an oxymoron, especially to my diplomatic friends who spend all their time obsessing about words on a paper. And sometimes it can feel like those words on a page is just about semantics. But I think Brianna really drove it home, the real world implications of some of those words, like, for instance, the difference between 2-degree temperature rise and 1.5-degree temperature rise. So I really loved the way she told that story. But just in terms of your question, Ambassador, how do you turn ideas into impact, talk into action? And I talk about this in the book based on, many of the great who I call policy entrepreneurs, and Brianna's an example of that. You're an example of that. But, what I've tried to distill into these sorts of 8 principles, and 2 of them are maybe most relevant here in terms of your question, in terms of how you scale. I think the first one is around the power of bold, naively audacious goals, right? And it was a friend of mine, Ari Robinson, the former Secretary General of Junior Chamber International, who really told me about the power of naive audacity. And he basically said, listen, there are many times in life where we take on a challenge and we don't have access to networks, right? Don't have the expertise or the implementation experience or the technical experience, or we don't have access to funding, or we don't even have access to power, right? And his argument, based on a lifetime of research, is that if you have a naively audacious goal that is very clear in terms of the impact that will happen if certain actions are taken. So if Y policy is implemented, Z outcome will happen over here. That can be enough to rally people around to overcome that inexperience, to overcome that lack of access, to overcome that lack of networks. Because right now, especially in a divided, polarized era, the era of the polycrisis, as you've called it, people are yearning for solutions. They're yearning for clear goals in terms of how to make an impact. And I, in my own experience of seeing this, even with the start of Global Citizen, one of our first campaigns, in Australia started with just an idea of a goal, something we wanted to change on the back of the envelope. I had no history in organizing events. I never organized a concert. You were right, Ambassador. I was a nerdy guy at school like you. So I had no idea how to organize any kind of events or anything, had no funding. 2 of the other founders were in different parts of the world at that time. But what I found is that when I circulated that idea and I took it around to people, is people wanted to help. They wanted to respond. And look, I could have written a book on that first campaign, but in the space of 6 months, we ended up convincing John Legend to fly all the way to Australia. We ended up getting MTV on board, and we even were able to get a meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard. And at the time, we had nothing against our name in order to drive those outcomes. So I don't discount the power of naively audacious goals. And in the book, I outline how to identify those goals and how to make them very clear, concrete, and precise. I think the second key element I would say, Ambassador, is when we talk about scale, we often assume we have to do it all ourselves. But actually, there's something to be said in the power of leverage and the power of leverage in partners. And I think too often, especially in the activist space, we find people competing with one another for the same audience, for the same access to decision makers, for the same funders, rather than turning around and asking ourselves the question, what is the unique thing I can do really well, right? And then what are my shortfalls and how can I find partners to overcome that? That's how you can scale really, really fast and really quickly. You know, global citizen, people assume we have thousands of people, right, working on our campaigns. But in actual fact, we have less than 100 people around the globe working full-time on this movement. And to give you an example, last week I was in Brazil preparing for the COP30 climate talks that will be taking place there next week. And there, all of our meetings, everything we did was all in partnership with local partners, working with this incredible organization, REWARD, indigenous groups on the Amazon rainforest. We know what we can do well. It's amplification, it's driving actions, but we're not on the ground implementers. We don't have that technical experience, and we don't necessarily know all those businesses in Brazil. And so that's where we were working with others. But, you know, there's that great saying, you know, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And that's what we need to leverage more.
Thank you, Mick. And I want to add to that saying, you can't beat something with nothing, right? So there's going to be a lot of cynicals out there, but something is always better than nothing. And with regard to your comments about scaling up, as you know, in our experience with the Global Town Hall, we did a door knock approach to countries in Asia, in Latin America, in Asia, reaching out to civil society groups. And the majority of these groups that we reached out to said that no one ever called us before, and we don't feel part of global conversations. So the infrastructure is out there, but the connection is still minimal. And there's just a sea of NGOs and policy entrepreneurs out there that we need to reach out to and need to work with. Yeah. And Brianna, I guess my question to you is, how were you able to capture public opinion in Samoa? Was this a narrative that was easily digested and accepted, or did you have to craft it in a way that would move the public opinion in Samoa? And also, how were you able to convince your government that this is the biggest issue they should undertake?
Yeah, such a great question. And I guess a real answer to that is exactly what you just said about you can't beat something with nothing. And I think that's how the group of us, like when we were young and we were starting 350 Samoa, Pacific Climate Warrior Samoa, what we just did, before we would say anything, like go to the media or like put out any campaigns, we just did something. We thought like the work can speak. And at the time, because we were so young, like when I say we started young, we were like 12, 13-year-olds who started this environmental group in Samoa, just from a primary school group. And that was the start of Pacific Climate Warriors Samoa. And we were just doing small community events, and we thought we weren't going to preach to our community and say like climate change is a big thing, we should be doing this, or you should be doing that. We thought we should just do it. So instead of saying it, we should just go out there and start. We started with primary school kits. So we did like a audit of our school, of how environmentally friendly our school was. We did like a carpool registry for everyone who lived in the same village so that people could come in like less cars into school. And so we did these like very small things. And we
Brianna,
put
can
together...
you hear us? We can't hear you somehow. Oh, now we can hear you. Yes. Okay.
You can hear me? So we really basically just did very small things that we had control of. And the message just got out there in the community because the community saw that we were doing the work. And that's really how we got a hold of that narrative of climate change isn't something that's happening to us, it's something that we are taking a grip of. But I think the bigger challenge for us than just holding the narrative locally was trying to get a hold of the narrative globally. Because the narrative globally was that we were drowning islands and that we were victims waiting for handouts. And because there was such a big narrative globally, there were so many documentaries that came to Samoa and Pacific Islands in the early 2000s, just about drowning islands, these poor people, taking away a lot of dignity from Pacific Island people, and really telling half-truths of the story. And because these stories were so pervasive, we started believing it ourselves. And so we faced that with some of the small projects we were doing. Some of our community, they just felt like it was useless because they were already told that we were drowning islands by BBC and CNN, who came and did these small docos in our islands. And so taking a hold of the international narrative, the Pacific Islands, was really our biggest challenge. And we weren't able to do that alone as Pacific Climate Warriors Samoa. That is when we started connecting with Vanuatu, and we started connecting with groups in Fiji and Cook Islands, and realized that they were facing the same issues around narrative. And that was really the beginning of the regional network Pacific Climate Warriors. That's when we first came together and we rallied behind a motto, which was, "We are not drowning, we are fighting." So that was the start of this warrior call. And when we started calling ourselves climate warriors, because we saw this like very simple slogan as a reclamation of like our power as Pacific Islanders, and trying to retell and reshift this narrative that we are not victims of the climate crisis, but we are actually people who are on the front lines of the fight. Which is still so like such a big part of our work with the Pacific Climate Warriors, and it's a very important part of our work, but something I'm very proud of, because the languaging that actually has come out of us as like a small CSO group has been, "We are not drowning, we are fighting," has been some strong languaging around phasing out fossil fuels and languaging around holding the line. So holding the line has been something we've said in a lot of media engagements around, like, we won't go past 1.5. We are holding the line there. That is our red line we can't go past. And then we've been noticing the past couple years that these are now sayings that our policymakers are saying. So we had the chair of AOSIS say that last year at COP. We've had prime ministers say these words, "Hold the line, we are not drowning, we are fighting." It's become language that's come out of community and come out of CSO, so that is now normalized as a narrative that policymakers are now saying. And so that has really been our evolution of how we've been able to take a grip of narrative that was going against us and redirecting it towards campaign goals and towards a trajectory that we need these narratives to go to fit our vision of the future.
Thank you, Brianna. Indonesia has 17,000 islands, right? And I think we have the same problem with Samoa. But I'm sorry to say, you guys in the Pacific are much worse predicament, because if the sea level rise, Indonesians still have 17,000 islands. Many of our people can move. But for you, you don't have plan B, right? If the one whole island goes underwater, you lose the country, right? So you guys are really fighting for your life, right? But I want to ask you a question, and then I want Mick to respond to this as well. Look, you rally Pacific Island peoples to the cause of climate security, but all of us face the problem of geopolitics, right? There's rivalries between U.S. and China and different groups of nations and so on, right? How do you navigate that? Because now, on climate change, on energy security, on food security, on health, you feel this competition pulling countries apart, pulling groups apart, and putting roadblocks, how are you dealing with this? And I want Mick also to respond to this. You're launching a global campaign. How do you deal with the geopolitics of it, which can be complicated? Yeah, Brianna, please.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think it's a constant struggle for CSOs in the Pacific, especially when certain political parties have ties to different countries from their opposing political party, right? And so there can be climate projects that are like supposed to span 8 years, and then a new government comes, and then there's that switch. There's that switch in geopolitical alliances. So it's something that we're always aware of in the CSO space in the Pacific, especially prevalent, like you say, for islands like Tuvalu, right? So Tuvalu has just had a switch in government just over this past week. And this was right after Tuvalu has signed a deal with the Australian government for basically what it was like Australia being a climate safe haven for climate-induced migration from Tuvalu, giving Tuvaluans citizenship in Australia. And there was an exchange in security rights of their land and their ocean. And so what we are now listening out for as CSOs is like, now that there's a change in prime minister, now that there's a change in government, what does this deal look like now? And it's still new. We don't know what that deal looks like now because the government just got sworn in last week, but it is something that we have to be mindful of. And I don't know if we have an answer to that. Everything feels so new because with the climate crisis, everything has to move quite fast, right? We're on a ticking time clock, but at the same time, we don't want to misstep, especially when it comes to geopolitical tensions and alliances. But it's almost something that we're trying to swim in troubled waters as the tides are changing, and we're just trying our best. But I'm really interested to hear Mick's experience with this.
Mick, how does Global Citizen navigate the geopolitics?
Well, it's a very good question, and in some ways it sort of relates and has a synergy with what Brianna was talking about earlier about Samoa, not being seen as a victim, right, but fighting and looking for partners, but it's leading the fight for its own, future. And it was interesting last year. About this time last year, March last year, I had the opportunity to visit Kiribati, another Pacific atoll nation. And the narrative around Kiribati is this is a small island. It's on the front lines of the climate crisis. And at the same time, it's also on the front lines of a geopolitical crisis between Australia, China, the United States. The two embassies are Australia and China. The United States is hoping to open up one. But it was interesting, when I was there and you meet the people, the first thing they told me is, we know the global community may not be able to get its act together on climate change, and we're coming up with our own adaptation strategy, right? And so the thing that they told me about, which I had no idea was going on, is just how they were planning. You said there was no plan B, Ambassador, but they were developing the plan B because they said, well, we might have to. And whether that's, ways to lift up houses, whether it's like, because there's several atoll nations, they concentrate on building up several of them and move away from the rest, whether it's, they build on stilts houses if there's increased flooding, but they were designing this plan B. And I think to them, the geopolitical conflict, or tensions in the region, to them, they were like, well, we're looking for partners, right, in order to meet our challenges. And we're willing to work with both China, Australia, and the United States, not in a cynical ploy, but in a way to address our issues. And, when I travel to different countries around the world, whether that's on the African continent, or even whether it was in Brazil last week with President Lula's hosting of the G20, what I see is a pushback from so much of the world saying we don't want another Cold War in which we are basically forced to choose sides. We want a world in which we're able to reach out and solicit partnership to deal with the big issues that we have on the agenda, whether that's hunger, whether that's climate change, because we can't afford to divide everyone's attention. And that message is so loud and clear. And I think for Global Citizen, it's about being true to our name, right? Global Citizen, and it's about being a voice. But the other thing I would just say is, you know, I think from our side at Global Citizen, it's also about remembering, you know, and I think this is true of all big institutions and entities that are much larger than us, that good ideas can come from everywhere, right? Everywhere and anywhere, and not forgetting that, and how we can amplify those solutions. And, you know, increasingly, we've spent a lot of time working with governments of these countries, you know, saying, well, what do you think we should be advocating for? What should we be pushing the G20 to implement? And I use an example here. Of course, you know, the other side of the Pacific is the Caribbean, right? And there's an incredible leader in the Caribbean. Many on this call might have heard of Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados. And she and a number of partners have developed this Bridgetown initiative, which is really, you know, at its simple steps, is a way to unlock more money for countries like hers to be able to transition to clean energy and better withstand natural disasters. And many of them are very simple ideas, like if there's a hurricane or flood, you know, a country like hers should have an automatic reprieve in their debt repayments so that they can invest in local response and bounce back better. And I think from our perspective, it's like, how can we support leaders like that, both to captivate and secure the attention of those in power in these big institutions, but also to get these policies implemented as well. And I think the response to that has been huge. Even last year, we met with the climate change minister of Malawi, who said, these are the 5 things I need help from civil society in order to get attention of those in Washington, London, and Beijing.
Thank you, Mick. Let me take a question from Amalia. She has an NGO called Bicara Udara, which means talking about the air. Amalia asked that she's fighting for clean air in Jakarta, and she also does the same methods that you mentioned earlier, which is to change government policy. But the problem is the political system. So how can we strategically make politicians listen to our voice when the system does not support our campaign? So maybe either you or Mick want to answer it, Brianna. But Mick, also want to ask your tips. I know you talk to a lot of world leaders, right? What is your tips on how to talk to world leaders effectively? I know some people think that if you go in the room angry, fuming with smoke coming out of your ear, they will listen. I don't think so. You know, there's a certain way of talking to world leaders, and I know you have a long knowledge on that. Please share with us. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, on that, and you know, Brianna might want to touch on this because I actually use her as an example of this in the book. But just on that, you know, when you go into a meeting with a decision maker, you know, one thing which I advise, and I've learned myself as an advocate, you need to build trust and credibility really fast, right? And going in with a litany of asks isn't the way to do that. And the reason why is people don't trust others when they don't understand their motivations for being there. Why are you there? And so if you just go in, I'm really angry and all of that, chances are their eyes are going to glaze over, or they're going to look at you and be like, well, why should I listen to you? Or they're going to walk out and say, this is just a disgruntled person, join the list, and you know, forget about it, right? Add it to the pile of all the other issues. So I say, you know, one of the best things that you can do if you've got a decision maker's time is look for narratives and stories. And those stories and narratives that will resonate are those that focus firstly on why am I here? What's my origin story, right? And secondly, on the power of how, right? People want solutions, even decision makers, right? So show them how they can address these issues. Don't just give them it's not even about being angry, and it's not about giving them all the facts and statistics, but tell them why they should trust you and the solution. And I liked what Brianna was saying on that point, where she goes in before she asks, a country to help Samoa or an institution to help Samoa. She first says, listen, this is what we're doing. And she talks about these incredible, ways that Samoa is adapting to and addressing the impacts of climate change. And that's powerful. The other thing I would say is, addressing the question on air pollution is, I often say, look for frames that's going to resonate. And at the end of the day, self-interest does resonate, whether we like it or not. And I don't think I'm being cynical in saying that, but try and find a frame, why people should care about the issues, right? Everyone has a reason. It could be electoral politics. It could be, air pollution. Maybe it's about the impact that has on health, and therefore the impact that has on increased hospital costs. And then I would say the third tip I've got is think about how you can break down addressing a huge challenge like air pollution into bite-sized steps. You may not be able to address all the issue at once, but how can you at least pick up some of those challenges? And an example of that at the global level is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. This effort was born because of gridlock at the climate talks in terms of securing an agreement to phase out fossil fuel. And what they recognized is we're not going to get universal consensus like from Saudi Arabia, the US, and all these other countries reliant on fossil fuel revenues straight away. And so what they decided is we're first going to start with countries like the Pacific. In fact, the first who it originated was Vanuatu, then the Caribbean with Antigua and Barbuda. And now they've started to get the support of fossil fuel producing countries with Timor-Leste and Colombia signing on as well. And the idea is over time, you build that support up so it changes the norms, and the countries that haven't signed on almost become the holdout countries and face the pressure as a result. And so, just to summarize, stories of how and why, strategic frames that appeal to people's self-interest, and how you can break a big challenge down into smaller incremental steps. But I'll let Brianna talk on this as well, because she's probably got her own insights too.
Very useful. Brianna, go ahead.
100%. I think Mick answered this question perfectly. And if I could just add a little bit on what Mick was saying around the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I was lucky to be a part of the group that was advocating for Pacific Islands to come on board and endorse the treaty. And something that we found really useful was, like Mick said, like this meaningful engagement with governments. We noticed, and this is specific to the context of Pacific governments as well, but we wanted to move beyond transactional conversations, right? Like, we want this from you. We see you doing this for us. We wanted to actually sit with them and hear, like, how do you actually see this fossil-free Pacific being built? Because I think that can sometimes be the mistake that people walk into policymakers or decision makers' rooms, is that we have all the answers and you haven't been trying. When sometimes there is work that's being done behind the scenes that we as the public aren't privy to. So that was always the first conversation that we tried to have with governments, is we didn't go in there with the assumption that they weren't working towards a fossil-free Pacific. We asked them, what does this actually look like for you? And is there work that we should be aware of? And once we've kind of started that conversation and trying to build a relationship with our governments, that's when the real conversation started. And again, tautokoin, which is I'm trying to think of the English word for tautoko. It's in support of what Mick was saying, in support of what he's saying around trust. The fastest speed we can move at is the speed of trust. So if you can sit there with someone, just human to human, and just try and establish some sort of trust with them, that is such a great foundation in which you are able to build a working relationship with a person, with a government, with an organization.
Thank you. And I want to add my 2 cents also. My technique, always compliment first and criticize later, right? Don't sit and then, hey, you're doing this wrong, right? So be a bit diplomatic. Secondly, I see a majority of young people who have ideas and organizations. They have big ideas, but they don't know how to articulate their viewpoints. So articulation, I mean, I'm looking at Brianna and Mick, you are very articulate people, right? But majority of people that I see that they need to really practice and learn how to shape how they sell their message. And then thirdly, don't be in their face when you talk to them. You know, a lot of times when I was in government, I see you know, civil society groups who go to my office and they're like, "This, you have to do that," and so, and you know, it's a big turnoff. Yeah, give me my space. Let me hear your argument. So the body language and the art of articulation, I think, is important to convince the government people. I have a question from Bryce. Bryce is from Philippines. I have a question for Mick. You mentioned the term policy entrepreneurship a lot. How does one attain that quality? And how can we be a policy entrepreneur when we're not part of government?
So that's an interesting comment, and I outline in the book how I view policy entrepreneurship and who can and can't be a policy entrepreneur. But in short, anyone can be a policy entrepreneur. You know, yes, they can be in government, and sometimes you do get fantastic leaders in government. I already mentioned Mia Mottley as one example of that, and there's countless others around the world who are doing the work inside of government, often unseen, often unheard, to move the needle. But to be honest, you know, I also meet many policy entrepreneurs who aren't part of government. Often they're not even part of an institution. Often they're everyday citizens, but they can also be in business. You know, they can be looking, if they're in business, they can be looking at how do we lobby institutions around the world? How do we lobby government? What influence are we having? And really, a policy entrepreneur is someone, regardless of where they are, who says, you know, what spheres of influence do I have? You know, maybe it's my friends, family, maybe it's my workplace, maybe I'm at university, right? And then what are my points of leverage? But really, we need more people outside of government. And the reason why we need more people outside of government to be policy entrepreneurs is because, as Brianna said, actually, people in government are often limited. They're limited by the constraints of government. You know, we assume that even the most powerful people in the world can click their fingers and get things done. But often that's not the case at all. You know, when I first met, my first time I met Prime Minister Julia Gillard of Australia, I'll never forget, she said to me, you know, when we were asking her for her government to finance a priority area we were advocating to her on, she said, I need you, meaning people at large across Australia, to give us permission to spend what is in the end your money. And so I think, you know, a policy entrepreneur at the end of the day is someone, you know, yes, they might be engaged in direct advocacy, but they're also using non-traditional methods. They're building coalitions at the community, state, and national level. You know, they're telling stories of impact, stories of change, you know, in order to really move the policy agenda forward. And, you know, one critical attribute of a policy entrepreneur that those in government can't always do is to communicate stories of success. I loved what Brianna was just talking about when she said she goes to an official, she'll often ask them what they're already doing, because often people aren't aware of that, and that's what breeds cynicism. And often people outside government are some of the best people in order to share those stories. You know, in the book, it's not related to climate change, but I interviewed these grassroots advocates in South Africa who had basically succeeded in persuading the South African government to make sure that in schools across South Africa, period products were available so that girls, when they hit their menstrual cycles, didn't have to drop out of school, right? They had access even in the poorer communities of South Africa. And when we got on the call with one of the decision makers to find out how that was being implemented, I remember the official telling the stats of all the schools, universities they were in. And I remember one of the advocates saying, wow, I had no idea. We need to broadcast that because that's also part of our advocacy. The reason why this is being rolled out is because of our advocacy. So we need more people engaged, taking action for this to work and to actually show people the results, right? And that's often something that government is terrible at. They're terrible at being communicators. Often they can't because people don't trust them. And so one of the attributes is to actually share those stories of success. And one thing I'll say, in terms of how we rebuild trust, studies show that when we hear something, in the news, right, or on social media, we have such low levels of trust these days for misinformation. But when we hear something from our friends and family, that's often one of the best ways to get people to say, aha, I believe that, and to in turn motivate them to get involved and to take action too.
Thank you, Mick. We're gonna go to the next segment, which is raise hands to ask questions to Brianna and also to Mick. I see from Bangladesh, Marufa. Hi. Thank you, Marufa. Please ask your question. Yeah.
Now better. So I'm from Bangladesh. Currently, I'm in Hawaii. Oh, excuse me. So should we focus on the space projects or the ocean projects? Like, should we take care of the sky or the ocean? Like, which is the most priority around the world? Like, wherever you are from, if we want to make an agenda for the next 20 years for Earth, should we focus on the space or the ocean? Like the budgets and the manpower and everything. Thank you.
Brianna?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think it's more than a this or that, and it's an and. I think we should focus on both, And I always say that for individuals or for groups who are wanting to focus on like one area, especially in a time where it feels like we're living within multiple crises, it's basically what issue do you want to tackle? Like, what focus do you want to hone your skills and your time into? And that should be it. I sat with a marine biologist a few months ago in a traditional canoe in Fiji. And she was talking about how there's a huge ecological crisis we're living in. And she was saying that there's so much wrong with our forest. There's so much happening with our ocean, with the air. And she was saying that the trees are trying their best and the ocean is trying its best, and humans just need to try, because at the moment we're not trying. And so I always think about that when things feel overwhelming and like I have to choose one thing or the other, and remind myself that it's not a and or, it's a and that really it's just up to us as individuals. What do we want to tackle? Because I think what we can also be reminded of is, if all these crises are interconnected and they're all woven together, whatever thread we choose to pull, we just pull that one thread, knowing that it will slowly start to unravel the whole map, right? And so I think I hope that's useful to the question, a very big question you're having.
Nick, you want to jump into that?
No, I love that response, and I think I would say, and I don't want to offend anyone in the climate or environment movement, but I would say one of the toxic elements I've seen over the years is when some advocates advocating for one issue, right, become so convinced that that's the one focus area that they need to focus on, and anything else is a distraction. And I think that's deadly. And where I've seen it, for instance, is often in those who focus on reducing the planet's reliance or the economy's reliance on fossil fuels, right, which is a big part of global emissions, no question. But then almost thinking that, well, okay, if you're focused on efforts to prevent deforestation, or even in efforts to scale up technologies to remove carbon from the atmosphere, that you're engaging in actions which is a distraction, which is taking action from the main game. Because the reality is the the extent of the climate crisis is such, and all the pathways to 1.5 degrees will tell you that we need all solutions on deck. We need to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, but we also need to reduce deforestation, which accounts for up to 20% of global emissions. And every roadmap to 1.5 degrees is predicated on the fact that even if we reduced emissions by 90 to 95% by 2050, that still leaves 5% of emissions we'll be producing, plus it leaves all of the carbon we've already put in the atmosphere that we need to pull out. So we need to scale up other technologies, which is both natural and technological as well. So I think it's not either or. It's definitely the power of and. And again, you know, building on what Brianna was saying, I would say, well, looking at your strengths, your skills, your networks, you know, where is your value add, and then focus on that. It could be the sky, it might be the ocean.
Thank you. And before I go to Anthony, just one small comment on the air and the ocean. One of the most effective scare message that I tell my Indonesian friends is that in a 2-degree world, 99% of coral reefs will die. 2-degree world, 99% all coral reefs in the world will die. And can you imagine, Brianna, and Indonesia, a maritime archipelago, a sea-loving people without coral reef? That's just unthinkable, and it's what science says. So what happens, as Mick says, what happens in the air affects the ocean and affects our livelihood and even national identity. I go now to Anthony Chimenello. Can you tell us where you are talking to us from and ask your question? Thanks, Anthony. Please unmute. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm speaking from Melbourne, Australia, and I'm a mindset coach and also cross-cultural negotiator for business purposes. And I know the power of language and communication. And there's been so many slogans and policies out there, and really good ones, but without the right languaging and communication and technology, they just fail to get a voice. Yet we see how some political parties can come to power simply through the right use of language and changing people's mindsets. So have the speakers got any tips on what they use in respect of how they best communicate, the languaging, and also what mediums or technology they use to get the right policies into the right heads? Because it's so powerful and I see it everywhere.
Please, Mick or Brianna, any one of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hop in. I think it's such a good question. I think storytelling is such a big part of the climate work we do here in the Pacific. And an example I can give of that is the campaign around the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So when we first got a couple of governments on board to endorse the treaty, we were looking for more support from Pacific Island governments, which is when the Pacific team that were working on this campaign decided to do a series called Pacific Treaty Champions. So basically, it was a digital series using the power of social media. It followed kind of the format of this new, like, fast-paced digital storytelling. I wouldn't say fast-paced, more like bite-sized digital storytelling. So they're around 5 minutes each, these stories, digital stories of person who's championing the treaty. So someone like an activist, a community leader.
We lost you a little bit, Brianna. Here.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So we made these videos of these people who were championing the treaty. And one of the videos was done by a Tongan activist who was also an Australian. So his story was all around being a dual citizen, being a Tongan and being an Australian. And he told this beautiful story of his start in activism. And we filmed this video and we played it at one of the Pacific regional meetings, and the Tongan delegation watched this video and they were emotionally moved. Like the minister was in tears, and he was so moved by just this piece of media, this 5-minute video from this Tongan in Australia he's never met before, that after watching that video, he came up to the Pacific Treaty team and he said, I want to bring Tonga on board. Like, you have my full support. I'm going to get my government to sign. And it was within that meeting that Tonga endorsed the treaty. And so I think that was an example and a real proof to us of how narrative and languaging, as well as like smart use of digital storytelling, we couldn't get this activist from Australia to come to Vanuatu, but we were able to get this video of his played in Vanuatu, and his fellow Tongan community, who happened to be the Tongan government, believed in it so much and were moved by it so much that they actually came on board to endorse the treaty.
Mick, you want to add anything?
No, I think Brianna said it well. I think humans move humans, people move people, and that's about stories. And I've seen it lots of time. Even that first campaign that I mentioned with Julia Gillard, that specific campaign was aiming to increase Australian government support to eradicate polio. And when she announced and basically delivered on everything we had asked of her, even more money from the Australian government, and I said to her advisor, why is she doing this? Why is she acting? And she said, it's a story. She loves the stories of the heroic polio survivors and their resilience. She loves the stories of incredible community health workers who go door to door, delivering the vaccine, often at great personal risk. And she loves the story of Rotarians and communities in Australia and around the world who are fundraising and using their voice. And that's why she moved. And so I said, I don't think we should sometimes think it's the power of the argument from a technical point of view, because often it is those incredibly personal moments. You know, I've seen it in, you know, the marriage equality debate. Why did, you know, conservative lawmakers in Australia suddenly switch and support that debate after speaking to the mothers of those in the LGBTQ community who had committed suicide because of depression or bullying? You know, they expressed to me the fact that this was about pro-life for them, regardless of whether or not they agreed with the issue. Everyone could agree on the value of life. And so I think the stories is definitely a powerful way to move and get people's attention.
Thank you. The last question, raised hand, is Yafi Pratama from Indonesia. Yafi, go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
You are.
Yes, yes. I like
All
your
right.
batik, by the way. Everyone's wearing batik. Nice job. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I'm actually a high school student right now. I'm on tour in the Indonesian university.
Okay, your question, please.
Okay. I would like to ask to the various experts in the room there, which my question being that there has been a lot of instances just like the Just Stop Oil movement, where the protests have been, let's say, negatively perceived, which in my purview is that they have been wrongly accused of certain aspects, because the Just Stop Oil movement at its core is a great movement. It delivers a great message, but their ways of directing that message is negatively perceived. So my question being, how can we as individuals and civil societies both coordinate and work with the people who are accusing Just Stop Oil of obstructing traffic, and Just Stop Oil themselves to better help make the message more, let's say, easier to perceive and easier to accept? Thank you.
Mick, you can answer this and also give your closing statement. The same thing for Brianna. Yeah, Mick, go ahead.
Brianna, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. I think for me, like as someone who works in the Pacific, that is definitely not a form of activism that we would perform in the Pacific. We just know that it wouldn't work in our context and it wouldn't work within our communities. And so I think the first thing that we always chat about in like Pacific climate activist spaces is that it's not a form of activism that we would personally do. But for me, myself, Like I hold no judgment towards how other activists choose to do their activism if it doesn't harm people. And I actually met an incredible activist from Hawaii at one of the Global Citizen events, actually. Her name is Sage, and she was asked recently about this this kind of this viral moments that have been coming up online of like throwing soup at paints and blocking roads. And she said something that really stuck with me that I believe as well, is that what exactly is violent? Because people were saying that these acts of activism was violent, but she was saying that in their defense, that what the oil industry that they're protesting are doing, that is violent. What the fossil fuel industry is doing to communities, to indigenous communities, that is violent. So, you know, it's that argument, right? Like a decimated land and relocating indigenous people versus soup on a painting. What is more aggressive? And so I think for me personally, I always look at it like it's not my type of activism, but who am I to judge how another person chooses to show up in this work? And I guess closing remarks, I could only say thank you so much to Mick for inviting me. Thank you so much to Ambassador for having me on. It was lovely to chat with you all today. The Samoan word for talking is talanoa. And so tala means to open and noa means knots. So to chat and to talk and conversate, it means to open knots together. So it's this belief that there's a lot of knots in the world, there's a lot of knots in society, but how we start to unravel those knots and those hard parts of our planet is by chatting first. And that's how we open up conversation and open up dialogue so that we can weave new mats. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Brianna. It's a great pleasure, and I hope we stay in touch. And we wish you all the best in your campaign, which is our campaign. So yeah, Mick.
You know, it's a really good question. You know, one theory in campaigns is that you can shift the acceptability of a policy or an approach by taking an extreme position or taking what might be perceived as radical extreme measures. In this case, you know, just stop oil in the UK where people stood in front of traffic, right? That's the example here. And sometimes these measures can be effective. And the reason why they're effective is they can make less radical but still progressive policies seem more moderate by comparison, right? And an example of this in the US, it's called the McKibben effect after the famous environmentalist Bill McKibben. And essentially, he took an approach of advocating for big institutions like universities to divest from fossil fuels, right? And what some of the research found is that changed the conversation amongst policymakers from a dialogue of whether we should act on climate change to what is the best policy approach. And it actually, you know, the data suggests boosted support for perhaps more moderate positions, such as investment in clean energy, right? And you saw the upfront of that now in recent years with billions of dollars from the US government going to subsidize the development of clean energy. So that's a positive example. The negative example is sometimes that these extreme measures might actually make other positions, right, in the broader movement, you know, also seem radical or you know, extreme by association, right? You know, and so it could paint everyone with the same impact and push people away. I think the jury is still out with don't stop oil. Like I think, you know, you look at the UK right now, over the last 12 months, you look at some of the backtrack taking place amongst both the government and even the opposition, the Labour Party, who are likely to win the election this year in terms of drop in support. And so I think it's really, really important, you know, when we look at the activities, you know, where we direct our anger and our angst. And again, I think the jury's still out as to whether this is effective. And I've spoken to people who have their theories of change, and it may well work. But I think Jane Goodall, you know, offered an alternative view. She said, you know, rather than disrupting traffic for ordinary citizens who might actually be inclined to support and make life a little bit harder. Maybe they're trying to drop their kids off at school, etc. What about actually making life harder for those in power, right? In Downing Street, for the oil executives in their home? Go and disrupt their lives and take it to them. That was Jane Goodall's advice. And of course, she's got 90 years of experience being an effective campaigner. But, I think there's a range of activities out there, a range of methods by which we can approach. My message is like, let's all get engaged. And I think it's better to do something than nothing at all.
Thank you very much, Mick. Those are very powerful messages. And by the way, before I close, Mick, now that you have a baby, do you feel an added burden and responsibility towards your mission, in the sense that you're doing this now for your baby rather than?
I mean, the climate crisis was always real, because I have the fortunate pleasure, I suppose, of being able to have many friends around the world. Some of them are dealing with these impacts firsthand, and I've seen it and I've seen the response. But one thing I guess it does drive home is it definitely makes the time horizons abstract, right? We talk about 2050, even 2100, and some have said that tragedy of the horizon is why politicians are unable to act in the short term to address these issues, where the consequences might be felt in decades' time. But my daughter, she'd still be around, hopefully, touch wood, 2100, right? And so I think it just makes it all the more real that when we say, a matter of decades, it's not really that long away. And these are people we know. And one thing I document in the book is that actually one of the best ways to build support for policy change, right, isn't to slap people off over the head with all the doom and gloom and the bad stuff that's going on in the world, because that can backfire and just make people feel that addressing climate change is futile. Actually, it was to get people to write a letter to a future child, or a child who will be growing up in 2055, may not even be born yet, talking today about what we're doing to address these issues. And that's one way to make vague and abstract policy change feel more real, and also the idea that we can affect change as well.
Thank you. Well, it's unfortunate that we've come to the end of our session. This has been very, very useful and very inspiring. I hope there's a lot of skeptics and cynical people who are listening to this, because I forgive you if you see the world as half empty. But look, like Mick said, people who have the will and the resources to do something, not all the time, but sometimes they get to achieve what they want to achieve, and that's how the world changed. I remember when I was younger, in my teens, in Indonesia, you just see events happening and you don't have any control over them. The media was just in the national TV and a few newspapers, right? But recently I produced a video, a statement on something, on political integrity, and I just put it out there. And for some reason, it just went viral. Everyone I talked to, even though I did not send them, said, "Hey, I saw that video of yours. Thank you," and so on. Even Indonesian diaspora from other countries. But the point I'm saying is that we actually have tools that no previous generation ever had before. And those tools can amplify our voice, and those tools can shape public opinion, can create a basis also for action, right? So it depends what you do now. All of you have phones, all of you have Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all of you have friends, and it's a question of whether or not you use these tools for the good of your community and for the larger cause. And I think we learned from Mick and Brianna today that ordinary people, ordinary geeks like me and Mick, Brianna is not a geek. I'm sure she's a adorable, what do you call, prima donna in her high school, right? But we all get to do something important with the will, with the determination, with the know-how, as Mick and Brianna showed, and also with the tools at our disposal. Let's hope to change the world. It can be changed. We just need to fight for it. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I look forward to welcoming you in our next Global Town Hall series. And don't forget to join our big annual Global Town Hall at the end of the year. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Mick. Thank you, Brianna. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mick and Brianna, for your incredible insights, and of course, Padino for moderating the session. Before we wrap up the event, I would like to invite the speakers, participants, everyone for the session. Everyone, please turn on your cameras and have your bright smile ready. We're going to take a picture. Okay, on my count, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's wait a little bit so everyone can get their cameras on. Okay. Another one. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It has been a very fruitful discussion, and I'm sure the participants found the session very interesting and highly informative. Today's event will be available for rewatch on FPCI's official YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. Additionally, you will see a link in the chat box for everyone to fill in and claim the e-certificates. Please make sure to fill in the details correctly, as the e-certificates will be sent to your email right after this event. And for the book winners, please send your name and email through the private chat box to Secretariat FPCI. Once again, thank you everyone for tuning in to today's discussion. For more information about our events and programs, you can follow us on our social media handles on Instagram at FPC Indo and at Global Town Hall. Also, do stay tuned for our next Global Town Hall series. See you at the next FPCI events. Goodbye.